I never told anyone what happened after the World Cup final. Not because I was afraid, because I knew no one would believe me. I worked as a broadcast technician that night. My job was simple. Stay behind after the match, disconnect the camera systems, and make sure every piece of equipment was packed before sunrise. By the time I finished, more than 80,000 fans had already left the stadium. The cheering was gone. The fireworks had stopped. Even the players had disappeared down the tunnel. It was just me, and a few maintenance workers cleaning up what was left of the biggest game on Earth. If you've never been inside a stadium after everyone leaves, it's hard to explain how different it feels. A place that had been shaking with noise suddenly becomes unnaturally quiet. Every footstep echoes. Every gust of wind pushes confetti across the concrete. You start noticing things you normally wouldn't. At least, that's what I told myself. I was carrying my last camera case across the sideline when something made me look up. High above the field, near the top row. Someone was still sitting there, alone, completely still, and I figured it was a fan who'd fallen asleep after celebrating. I even waved. They didn't wave back. I checked my watch. 11:48 p.m. The maintenance crew disappeared into the service tunnels as the upper floodlights shut down, leaving only the lights over the field. The place felt strangely empty. I headed toward the broadcast room, pulling my equipment case behind me. The wheels echoed through the tunnel so loudly they almost sounded like someone walking a few steps behind me. I stopped. The echo stopped too. 12-hour shift, I muttered. I grabbed my radio. "Control, this is Jake. I'm heading up with the last camera." Only static. Most of the crew had already signed out. When I stepped back onto field level, I looked toward the upper stands again. The same person was still there, sitting exactly as before, not moving. That bothered me. People stay after big games and they cry, they celebrate. But nobody sits perfectly still for 20 minutes after the stadium is empty. I raised my hand. "Hey!" My voice echoed through the stadium. No response. I kept walking, but every few seconds, I looked back. They never moved. By then, curiosity had replaced common sense. I set the equipment case down and pulled out the broadcast camera. It still had plenty of battery left. I zoomed in and the image sharpened. A dark jacket, hands resting on their knees, head tilted toward the field as if the match were still being played. The face was too far away to make out. "Hey!" I shouted again. Nothing. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. Not fear, just the sense that something wasn't behaving the way it should. I lowered the camera for a second and rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, the seat was empty. I froze. I checked the section with my own eyes. Nothing. There was no way someone could have disappeared that quickly. Then I caught movement. On the opposite side of the stadium, I swung the camera across the field. Another lone figure, different section, sitting perfectly still. A chill ran through me. There was no way anyone could have crossed half the stadium without me seeing them. I zoomed in again. The jacket looked exactly the same. As the autofocus locked, the figure slowly lifted its head, not toward the field, toward me. Every instinct told me to leave. Instead, I picked up the equipment case and headed for the control room. I needed a logical explanation. Maybe there were two people. Maybe I was just exhausted. The control room overlooked the entire stadium through a wall of glass. Dozens of security monitors were still running. The room was empty. Someone had left a half-finished cup of coffee beside the console. One headset still hung from a chair, slowly spinning. I sat down and pulled up the security cameras. The upper section was empty. I switched to another angle. There they were. The same lone figure, sitting perfectly still. I looked through the window overlooking the stadium. The seats were empty. I looked back at the monitor. The figure hadn't moved. I switched to a tunnel camera, an empty hallway. Then, for less than a second, the figure walked across the screen. Not running, not hiding, just walking at a calm, steady pace. I replayed the footage. Nothing. The hallway was empty before I could check again. Every monitor flickered once, twice, 3 times. Then every screen switched to the same camera. A wide shot of the stadium, centered on the field. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a lone figure appeared at midfield, standing perfectly still, looking directly toward the control room. Toward me. I shoved my chair back so hard it slammed into the wall. The figure never moved. It simply stood there, watching. The glass between us suddenly felt paper thin. I grabbed the radio. "Security, this is Control. Is anyone on the field?" Only static. I switched channels. "Maintenance, come in." Nothing. Then a loud pop echoed through the ceiling speakers and the stadium's public address system powered on. That shouldn't have been possible. It had been programmed to shut down after the stadium was cleared. A second of silence passed. Then the familiar announcer's voice filled the empty arena. Calm, professional. The same voice that had introduced the teams before kickoff. "Attention, ladies and gentlemen." The words echoed through thousands of empty seats. "Please remain in your seats." I waited for the automated message to continue. It never did. Silence. Then the speakers crackled again. The voice sounded different now, slower, almost uncertain. "One spectator," a pause, "is still inside the stadium." My stomach dropped. I looked around the empty control room. "Nobody," the voice continued. "He believes he is alone." Every hair on my arm stood up. Nobody should have known I was still here. Then the speakers clicked one last time. The next words were almost conversational. Quiet, personal. They said my name. Slowly, perfectly. "Jake." A long pause. "Don't turn around." I spun around. The room was empty. No footsteps, no open door, no one standing behind me. I looked back at the glass. The reflection was normal again. For a moment, I told myself exhaustion had finally caught up with me. Then I remembered the replay system. If someone had really been on the field, the recording would prove it. I sat down and opened the replay timeline. 11:56 p.m. The field was empty and I scrubbed backward, then forward, nothing. I let out a slow breath. That's when I noticed a camera feed I'd never seen before. No camera number, no location, just a blank label. "Live archive." I clicked it. The screen faded in. The upper seating section filled the monitor. The lone spectator was still there. The timestamp read, 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes in the future. I checked the clock beside the monitor. 11:56 p.m. I kept watching. The figure slowly stood. For the first time all night, it moved. Not toward the stairs, toward the camera. Slow, steady, purposeful. When it got close enough, the camera captured its face. I couldn't breathe. It was me. Same jacket, same security badge. Even the small cut above my left eyebrow. Every detail was identical. The other me stopped in front of the camera, looked straight into the lens, smiled, then slowly raised one finger and pointed behind the camera, as if someone was standing there. I didn't wait to see anything else. I slammed the monitor off, grabbed my backpack, and ran. The camera, the radio, and everything else stayed behind. My footsteps echoed through the hallway, and then another set followed. Half a second later, always behind me, and I refused to look back. The emergency exit was only a few yards away. I shoved the crash bar. Locked. I hit it again. Nothing. My phone showed no signal. Then every light went out. Darkness, complete darkness. For one long second, there was only my breathing, and then the stadium speakers came alive. "Exit sequence initiated." 5. A spotlight snapped on behind me. 4. Another, then another. 3. I turned. The stadium was glowing. Every floodlight had come back to life. Every seat was occupied. Tens of thousands of people, silent, motionless, and all staring at me, not at the field, only at me. 2. Every head tilted at exactly the same times, slowly, as if they were studying me. 1. The entire crowd stood together. The sound of 80,000 seats folding upward rolled through the stadium like thunder. And in the exact center of the field, I saw myself, waiting, smiling, holding the only exit door open. I don't remember making the choice. 1 second I was staring at myself. The next, I was running, not toward him, toward the open doorway behind him. I kept my eyes on the ground as I crossed the field. I could hear thousands of synchronized footsteps behind me. I never looked back. The moment I reached the tunnel, everything went silent. No footsteps, no announcer, no crowd. Just silence. I burst outside and collapsed onto the pavement. Cold night air hit my face. A security guard rushed over. "You okay?" I pointed back at the stadium. "There are people still inside." He frowned. "Sir, the stadium's been empty for almost an hour." I looked at my watch. 11:07 p.m. I froze. The last time I'd checked, it had been nearly midnight. According to my watch, I'd gone backward in time. The next morning, I convinced myself it had all been exhaustion. Until 3 days later. The official broadcast of the World Cup final was uploaded online. I skipped through the highlights, trying to prove none of it had happened. Then I paused, a wide aerial shot during the second half. Thousands of fans, flags, lights, noise, then high in the upper deck. One section was completely empty, except for a single person sitting perfectly still, wearing my jacket, looking directly into the broadcast camera. I checked the timestamp. The shot had been recorded hours before I stayed behind. I closed the video and I never opened it again, but sometimes people send me screenshots from that exact moment. They always ask the same question. Who's the guy sitting alone? I never reply, because I still don't remember buying that ticket.